if you don't like what's going on right now, don't complain. Don't get anxious. Don't throw up your hands in despair. Don't boo. Don't hashtag. Vote.
Former President Barack Obama has been a constant surrogate for Democrats in recent election cycles, and this year is no different. Former president's rallying for Vice President Harris in Pittsburgh tonight as he begins a multi-state swing for her this week. In Pittsburgh's where we find our Robert Costa, who's following the former president. All right, Bob, set the scene in Pittsburgh for us.
Hey, Scott, great to be with you from here in Western Pennsylvania. Former President Barack Obama will be on the stage right behind me in just under a couple hours to try to stitch together his own coalition from 2008 and 2012 for Vice President Harris and Governor Walz this time around. That means people of color. That means suburban voters. That means labor. All of those coalitions, all of those groups, core Democratic voters, remain targets for the Harris campaign. And there's a real private concern, I know you've heard it too, Scott, from some Democrats, that her support, Vice President Harris's support among labor members, among some voters in the urban areas in Pennsylvania and other swing states is a little bit soft. So by sending in former President Obama, there is a hope that he can get the energy on the ground in places like Western Pennsylvania, where former President Trump has long had a real groundswell of support in his own campaigns.
There's been an awful lot of focus on Pittsburgh by the Harris campaign, but where else is former President Obama going and focusing on?
Nothing has been set in stone yet, but based on my conversations with top Democrats, they expect former President Obama to go to Detroit, to go to Michigan, to also go to Milwaukee and Wisconsin, to maybe think about some of the suburban areas in Philadelphia and also go into the Atlanta area down in Georgia and maybe a little bit in North Carolina, which is back on the political battleground map. Obama did well there in 2008. There's a hope that if she doesn't win Pennsylvania, if somehow Trump drives a lot of voters in ex-urban and rural areas out to the polls, that she can come back with a win in the Deep South in North Carolina or Georgia.
You covered former President Obama for years. How does he differentiate his role as a surrogate? What's different about him as a surrogate on the stump?
He is someone who has such a built-in support network inside the Democratic Party. He's also a movement politician, someone who built a political movement, Hope and Change, in 2008. And you can see in the Harris campaigns, in its structure, in its thematic overtones, in its rhetoric, it's trying to come up with its own movement this time around. When you look around the arena here, you see a lot of posters and signs that say, "Yes, she can." And that, of course, is an echo of "Yes, we can," former President Obama's message in 2008. And Harris believes inside the upper echelon of her campaign that if she can have that political fire, that feel of a movement campaign in places like Western Pennsylvania, she has a real shot of winning this state and winning the White House. But it just can't be rote. It can't be routine. It has to have a little bit of that fire. Obama is seen as part of that project.
You've covered both men for so long. This many years later, how much does Obama still rattle former President Trump when he's out there campaigning against him?
Scott, we all remember that famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, the CPAC moment where President Obama really tweaked former President Trump, not CPAC, excuse me, at the White House Correspondents' Dinner over a decade ago. And that moment is searing in the memory of a lot of Trump supporters as former President Obama pushing Trump, maybe even pushing him to run. There's a lot of bad blood between Trump and Obama. You think about Trump questioning President Obama's credentials and love of country with the birther campaign back in 2011, 2012, and they have remained at odds ever since. And so you see in Obama someone who could draw Trump out, get Trump to fight a little bit, engage more. And for the Democrats I've spoken with, if Trump is fighting with Obama in this final stretch, that's fine with them. They like that fight. They like those dynamics publicly and how it could motivate Democratic voters to get out and fight.
In Pittsburgh, with Queen music as the background, Robert Costa, thank you very much. All right, let's bring in our political panel now. Jasmine Wright, politics reporter for NOTUS. Tom LoBianco, co-founder of and national political reporter for 24-site news. Jasmine, let's start with this Obama visit to Pittsburgh. Is this coming too early, too late, or just when you'd expect it?
Look, there is no clearer sign that we are in the stretch to November than seeing Democrats bring out Obama, their biggest, not-so-secret weapon, one of the Democrats' most popular politicians alive right now, because of the fact that he does exactly what Robert describes. He motivates Democratic voters. He motivates that base. And he also really is able to articulate probably the best of the Democratic Party, what is at stake for people to vote, because it's not just trying to get people enthusiastic about voting. The reason why they bring him out so late is because he also is really good at getting people to the polls and getting them to the polls early, particularly when the polls are everywhere, the hurricanes are affecting whether or not people are picking up their phones, right? People's phones are barely in North Carolina and Florida and other places, barely charged enough to call their parents. So they're not going to be talking to pollsters. So these campaigns are really having a deficit when it comes to real tangible numbers of where they should be surging their money in the last 3 weeks. And so getting people to the polls and polls early is giving them some of that data. And so that is why President Obama is being brought out in the last stretch here. Yes, to enthuse Democratic voters, but also to get people to the polls and cast their ballots as early as possible in these early voting states.
I'll bring you the same question, Tom, because I've heard this both ways. Have they wasted this opportunity in the weeks prior, or do you not want to bring the closer in before the 8th or 9th inning? What's your reporting, and how do you read that?
You know, Pennsylvania is interesting in terms of the dynamics. I've been writing about this a lot over at 24-site news. It's mail-in. And if you look at, especially, you know, as one of the key contested states in 2020 and still now with all the blue wall, centerpiece of the blue wall, it's mail-in. Everything has to be mailed basically by the end of the month. Yep. Then they get counted on Election Day starting at 7 a.m. I was talking with a source on some numbers here. Republicans are cutting into that old advantage from 2020. And so the Democrats used to have that lockstep going into 2020. Not so much anymore. And, you know, again, Jasmine's talking here, this is why you bring in Obama. Because Obama goes into, it's turning out your base.
Yep.
It's getting people to show up, especially Philadelphia. Philly, the collar counties, 33, 34%, something like that, total vote turnout. You can amp that up. Conversely, for Trump, who has a hard ceiling in these places, turn it down. You know, some people might call that suppression. However they choose to do it, make sure those voters don't show up. And I think that's why you're seeing Obama, especially in Pittsburgh and Philly right now.
And we have Vice President Harris in Arizona, Jasmine, and you've been reporting on what you, I think, characterize as a possible numbers problem for her there. Explain that.
Yeah, I spent 4 days in Arizona, and I talked to people across the political spectrum in the Democratic Party and Republican Party and Independent Party. And the vibes there are people are hopeful but not optimistic, in part because they're running into this major problem that didn't exist in 2020, which is that 100,000 registered Democrats have left the state. And people are coming in droves to the state of Arizona, but they're registering as as Republicans or independents, which means that for the first time, Democrats not only have a surplus with Republicans, a major surplus, over 200,000 registered votes, but they also have, a deficit with Republicans. But they also have a deficit when it comes to the independents. Now independents have over 100,000 more registered voters than Democrats, which was a difference in 2020. And so they're trying to get over that huge hump, which means that they are reaching out to not just Democrats, because if every registered Democrat in the state voted, Democrats would still lose. But they have to reach out to Republicans, reach out to independents. And so I was with canvassers as they went and talked to Republicans and independents across the state, really trying to get them out. It's a difficult job. I was with Republicans for Harris, Mormons for Harris, these new coalitions that they've started to really try to diversify who is coming out and supporting Harris. Obviously, these folks are really modeled in the image of the late John McCain, moderate Republicans who don't like Trump, who don't like Carrie Lake, and who don't like extremism. So really trying to get them to really take that next step. If you don't like Trump, maybe you should vote for Vice President Harris, which is a tall order for a lot of Democrats for a lot of Republicans in a state that is traditionally Republican. And the last thing I'll say is it's not just reaching out to Republicans or reaching out to independents that are posing a problem for the campaign, people acknowledge. It's also their numbers with Latino men. That's causing a lot of problems in a state like Arizona, where they are heavily important and also more and more are leaning towards President Trump. So that's something that has Democrats concerned in the state as well. So again, hopeful but not optimistic.
Former President Trump goes back to Arizona this weekend, too. There's a conventional wisdom, Tom, that perhaps he's best situated among the 7 battleground states in Arizona. Conventional wisdom is dangerous this year, so we don't take it as anything.
Sure.
What do you make of the issue of immigration and his prospects there as he comes to Arizona this weekend?
You know, it's fascinating with this, and this, you know, think back to the famous Republican autopsy of 2012. I can basically hear Reince Priebus gouging his ears out when he hears these poll numbers, because that was supposed to be the fix coming out of the Romney loss. That was, you need to be more inclusive. Well, it turns out, and certainly Trump and his people know this and are playing on it, the culture fights, the culture wars. You know, especially, you know, I've been thinking a lot about John Leguizamo's been out here doing the tours. He talks about the difference between Hispanics and Latinos, Latin America, as opposed to Tejanos, Mexico. Very culturally conservative. And what Trump has been doing with it's very sharp strategic media strategies here, going on the podcast, playing FanDuel, Sportsbook, playing to younger Black and Latino men. And it seems to be working. I mean, he's not going to win that cohort completely, but again, if at the margins, you can cut into that, you turn it into a race. That's exactly what he's done.
Just a moment left here, Jasmine, but this town hall the vice president's doing in Nevada, what's the significance of that?
I mean, it's getting into exactly what we're talking about. Her running up the numbers with Latino women, with Latino men, trying to suppress the success that we're seeing former President Trump have, because he could have some of the highest numbers that we've seen a Republican get in decades with Black voters, with Latino voters. So it's trying to talk to that base, particularly in such a key state of Nevada, a state that Harris has spent a lot of time in, not just since she replaced Biden, but as the Biden campaign announced that he would run for re-election last year. She's been there a couple times. So this is a really key state for her, particularly because they see their path to 270 with that blue wall, but they're trying to get all the other major swing states as well to try to really gin up those numbers.
Jasmine Wright, Tom LoBianco, you got a lot in there.
Yeah.
Quickly, thank you both for your time.